I know too much. Government trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry. They attack without reason. Like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique. Treason to the Patriot Act. Come and get me, motherfucker. I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return. And if I back down now, then forever I burn.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great first-time guest coming on, and it's actually one of my favorite rappers of all time. It's Immortal Technique, and he'll be performing at the upcoming Anarchapulco 2019 from February 14th to 17th. Super excited to have him coming down to Acapulco, and super excited to talk to you, Immortal. It's great to have you on the show. And first question I have to ask you, just like everyone is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily choose that label in the same way that people who know lots of different forms of martial arts, they don't necessarily call themselves mixed martial artists, but they understand the idea that several forms of a combat system are what's needed sometimes in improvisational fights that aren't staged and set up in a dojo. So I think when I was a young man, I studied a lot of different forms of government, whether it was democracy, communism, republics, theocracies, oligarchy, all these forms of government. And it kind of led me down like a rabbit hole in my early teen years. And I realized that, there was really no such thing as a government, that it was simply people who ruled over other people and found creative use of systems to implement in order to create a buffer between the people that make everything happen and the ruling class of people that have stationed themselves as kind of the deciders, the tastemakers of humanity. And to me, I thought, what qualified these people to make these decisions for millions of individuals? When we're talking about a monarchy or a kingdom, then you're discussing, thousands of people fighting for one person's greed. So there had to be some sort of change in that logic for human beings en masse in a global society that was interconnected through like wide arrays of media to be able to implement a new ruling system. So I think we're in kind of that structural changeover, and we're also living in a country that's had like a soft coup since Kennedy died. So there's a lot of things that are triggers that opened my mind, for lack of a better terminology, and led me to believe, okay, here I can be ultimately critical of the right wing in its inception. And on the left, I can equally point to certain things that kind of give a clearer picture of where we're headed. So I've always had, of course, people look at my music and they'll say you have a hammer and a microphone, looks like a sickle. There's obviously going to be a left-leaning influence. There is, for a long time, what people call the left-leaning influence, but I would challenge that and say that Karl Marx, who's seen as the father of communism, like, I know that he's a respected intellectual, and I have this debate with all leftist friends. I'm sorry, but the people of Latin America and Africa, the indigenous people, we really didn't need a European man from the 19th century to come to the dark jungles of Africa and Latin America and explain to us the complex concept of sharing. We knew what that was for thousands of years. That's how we structured our societies. So I can't necessarily say I'm married to the ideology when the ideology co-opted what people have been doing for thousands of years. On a capitalist side, and what the right wing worships as their God nowadays, that's a system that's a couple of 100 years old. And it's bitten off a mercantile system that was created 1,000 years ago. And I think when you look at it, both of them don't really address humanity's needs in some really basic fundamental ways. And this plays itself out over the course of what people see as the right-left paradigm within the United States, which is, for all intents and purposes, a theater for the rest of the world. And right now, the theater is playing a reality show. So that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just so happens the president is actually a reality TV show actor. So it's absolutely perfect. And you bring up a great point about government. It doesn't really exist. And one of our top speakers at Anarchapulco, his name's Larkin Rose, and he wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, where he basically talks about that. The government actually doesn't really exist. It's, as you just pointed out, just a bunch of people who somehow have garnered the ability to rule over other people. And you'll find out at Anarchapulco that we're talking about all the different ways that we can move forward in peace and prosperity using without violence and things like that. And that's really the main core of Anarchapulco. So we're thrilled to have you coming down. I looked you up on YouTube just to look, aside from your music, which I love, I just wanted to see what you were talking about. And I saw a ton of interviews with you about things like the Illuminati and stuff like that. I was wondering if you are still into talking about things like that, because I saw a bunch of those videos were about 5 or 10 years old.
Well, I mean, I think that Illuminati is kind of a Renaissance, end of the Middle Age term, ideology, storyline. I can't even call it an ideology. What it entails is a connection to a much older philosophy or idea, some things that come from antiquity, hidden knowledge, the idea that there were civilizations that we don't know about. Now, here's the problem in automatically discounting things like that and saying that's not real or it doesn't exist or this is conspiracy theory and fantasy. Humanity itself, as in Homo sapiens sapien, the hominid species that we belong to, the genus, we've been around on Earth for approximately 200,000 years, and we only have about 8,000 years of recorded history. So that implies that we have about 192,000 years of being alive on this planet, and at some point we needed to pool resources. At some point there was a war. At some point, I don't think that the modern era invented vice. I don't think that we invented sin. We didn't invent killing. We didn't invent the things that have been happening and structuring in our society for years. I think that when you look at what we're talking about in terms of ancient secret societies, I think you can point to obviously a few instances in which they're very much a power player in terms of setting up and bolstering government. But the purpose of them is to not be named. And the purpose of them is to not be seen. So when I tell people, for example, that the modern Illuminati is the corporation, people say, well, how can that be? And I say, well, do you know who the people are who put these chemicals that are deadly to your children in the food? Do you know the name of the CEO? Do you know that these people can't be convicted of anything? Do you know that they're above the law in that sense? And if I poisoned someone's food, I would go to jail. But if they purposely put a chemical that they knew and had scientific proof that was dangerous, especially for children or for people in general, and they were caught, they would have to pay a monetary fine, but very few times, and it just microscopic in comparison to the other side of the justice system, which deals with individuals. Very, very few times are people ever held accountable in any real way for the damage that they've inflicted on a corporate level. So if you're looking for Illuminati now, a board of directors that doesn't have to announce itself, that doesn't have to have public meetings, that doesn't have to tell you what it's doing, what its agenda is. You know, they say that people have a 5 to 10 year plan. Countries have maybe a 100, 200 year plan, and empires have a 500 to 1,000 year plan. I think that corporations are playing a long game, and they have a 500 to 1,000 year plan of how they're going to conduct themselves and how things are going to change. They're like a radio station. Their only purpose is to keep people coming and listening. They're not there to change anything, most of them, the majority of them. They're there to put butts in the seats, and if they have to change the format to be able to do that, then they will, by whatever means necessary. And I think that touching on that point, it brings us to kind of a full circle about what we're all talking about here. You mentioned the speaker at Anarchapulco was going to talk about a variety of topics, but more speaking on government and the necessity for it, or if it doesn't even exist. I'll take it a step further than that. And I'm not trying to one-up the speaker, but let's have a further conversation about this. And let's say the inevitability of government collapse is going to happen, right? So the purpose of the meeting then should be a dual, which says, okay, the duality should be, one, why can't we be more informed about exactly what the the keynote speaker is going to talk about, and those are very important things. But then beyond it, what are we doing to prepare for that? Like, what are you as a person doing to prepare for the inevitability of the shutdown of the government permanently? Are you collecting rainwater? Do you know how to live off the land? Do you know how to farm? Do you know any self-sustaining skills? Excuse me, do you have any self-sustaining skills? I think that what we should be doing in terms of people who are, I won't say anti-government, but see the veil of government, we should be preparing ourselves for the inevitability of that, especially now when people think that that's so close. And I know that there are individuals who have done this before. They kind of have a disdain for them in the media. They call them Chicken Little. They say that people are crying wolf, that the sky is falling. But, you know, governments have failed incredibly recently all over the world. I mean, our own economic system came close to collapse only about a decade ago. So, I mean, I think we've been on a tightrope for quite some time. And I think the question shouldn't just be, okay, when are we going to acknowledge that there's no government? But when are we going to acknowledge that we, as a people, instead of being reactionary, have to be proactive to say, let's have a contingency plan as individuals, as people who see this as a temporary thing, because all governments are temporary. I mean, one of the best critiques of left-wing socialism or communism in general came from a man who wrote the Iron Law of Oligarchy, who wrote down that every government, whether it's a democracy, capitalism, communism, theocracy, whatever it is, it always breaks down into an oligarchy. You know, it always breaks down into a politburo, into a handful of senators, into a cabinet, into people who are sitting there and who give these benign names to what they do. You know, they're not a conqueror. They're a director now. You know what I mean? They're not a. You know, they find different language to describe what we all know is in some way, shape, or form either soft tyranny or the hard face of tyranny.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up a lot of great points, particularly about things like the Illuminati and conspiracy theories, so-called conspiracy theories and things like that. And I just want to let you know that there's actually a number of speakers talking about that in Acapulco this year. One of them was David Icke. You might be aware of him. He's quite well known. Another is Mark Passio, Max Egan, talking about who's exactly controlling this entire system and things like that. And of course, a lot of us are preparing for moving past these current systems that we have today, this governmental system, a lot of the things that we have, including the pharmaceutical industrial complex, getting off of the meds, getting away from things like that, growing your own food, all those sort of things we'll be talking about at Anarchapulco. So definitely all the topics that you're talking about there we're dealing with at Anarchapulco. So super excited to have you coming down. I wanted to ask you, I've been looking into videos lately, and I just wanted to ask you this because you've been in the music business at quite high levels. You know a lot of people. I've seen, for example, some of the people that I really like are people like yourself, people like Lupe Fiasco I like because he talks about, you know, anti-system sort of things. And it seems like the guys like yourselves who really are really aware of what's going on, don't seem to reach the highest levels of the industry. I was wondering if it's true, or if you have any comments on that you really have to sell out to reach the highest levels of the rap game.
I think what you're saying is pretty literal, in the sense that when I look at the control that I have over my own career, it really is kind of one of the few people who are outstanding in the sense that I have the total control over the mastering, the publishing, the rights to the records. I can do anything I want with them. I can put them anywhere, but I don't. And I don't purposefully, because even though I own all of them, the point for me writing these songs was never to sell cars, right? It was never to sell, energy drinks to people. I remember I did a festival called Rock the Bells, and it was a great festival, and everybody was there. Rage Against the Machine, Nas, Wu-Tang, and they were coming around to people, and they were offering them. You know, some of the younger acts, I'm not going to name names, but they took the money, and the older guys, obviously, they didn't need it, so they didn't care. But they were offering like $15,000, $20,000 for people to do energy drink commercials. And they came to me and they were like, hey, would you like to do an energy drink commercial? You're one of the larger independent artists. We'll give you $15,000. And I said, listen, I appreciate you guys, but I don't drink that. And I don't want my fans to. Like, I get it. If it was some positive cause, like, I traveled into the desert recently with a human rights organization, Leave Water for Immigrants. We do prison reform. I participated in going to Afghanistan to open an orphanage and a school. Like I'm willing to put myself on the line when it comes to certain things. And obviously I need to support and feed my family. But at the same time, I think that was the purpose of a lot of it. Like people who manage rappers or manage artists or manage businesses. I mean, even actors themselves that get millions of dollars to be in movies here, you don't see the commercials they do, but there's a history of them going to other countries to do commercials where it would tank their brand here, but they're able to do it in Germany, or they sell soup in Japan or some shit. You know what I mean? These are the things that they do. I never wanted that. You know what I mean? So I think that's the difference. I think the game was structured in that way for people to almost follow that path in the same way like an athlete would. You see, like an athlete gets a certain salary from a team that he plays for. The team equivalent would be the record label, right? And he doesn't really make that much money from the team as much as he makes off endorsements. Endorsements are where he makes his money, right? So similarly, a lot of artists are in the position where they're looking for the big payday, but they don't realize that the big payday is them selling beer or selling liquor or selling some other shit to people. And usually people in their own community of their own demographic, because that's what the company hired them for. And I never really had those aspirations. I guess it would have to be something that really mixed well with who I am and what I stand for. Like it was some kind of new technology or something that had to do with like musical equipment. Sure, I think there's exceptions that I could make, but it has to fit with who I am. You know what I mean? I think that's the difference. Some people have a brand. I have a person. That's me. I guess that's the way you can call it. My brand is me, my personality, what I choose to accept, what I can't accept. I think that it's strange that I brought up Rock the Bells because remember at that particular time I had, during the Bush administration, I enjoyed a lot of support from, people that were, I guess, on both sides of the spectrum that were against the war and the lies that went along with it. But then when I became critical of the Obama administration afterwards, I found that a lot of these people backed away. They preferred not to address the neoliberalism and kind of the fakeness of it all. And I think that for me, what bothered me a lot was that these were really smart people. Like, these weren't stupid people. In the same way I say that the same thing about Trump. Not everyone who supports him is a moron, but at the same time, they're both setting their watches to a broken clock. And a broken clock is right twice a day, but I would never set my watch to it. So you have people on the left doing that, people on the right, and then you have individuals who look at a scenario in which we say, okay, if we're looking at a crisis right now and we're trying to speak about these topics, then it becomes no longer popular if the blame shifts not only to Republicans but to Democrats, right? For example, if you say, yeah, you're throwing kids in cages, this is horrible, this is inhumane, and there should be no but after that, the only question then becomes how. How is a better question than but. How did these circumstances advance themselves? Well, we had a coup in Honduras, which was aided by the Clinton law firm, right? We had a situation called Fast and Furious in Mexico where guns were given tracking devices, ridiculous, and given to the highest bidder. Who buys weapons? Who buys Pentagon's surplus automatic weapons of that caliber? Who? Cartels, drug dealers, and they began a war, and that influenced millions of people to leave their homes, and they were uprooted. They were running away from a crisis, and instead of addressing that issue, instead of saying how, we were caught on the butt of the issue. But he did this too. Oh, but I know Trump put people in cages, but Obama did too. But you haven't addressed whether that's humane or correct. See, if I put a person in a cage, right, whether I was a lefty or a righty, if I put a person in a cage, we both know that according to quote unquote the law, that's kidnapping, right? I'm preventing a person from leaving a situation where they want to leave. I'm going to jail, or at least I'm going to be arrested and stand trial. But other people, they're kind of give away these rights to government, you know? And it's a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves. And this is interesting because I used to do like a prison program, and I asked people, you know, if someone killed your friend, like your brother, would you want to kill them? And the answer, you know, a lot of times, whether I asked it in a private school or in a prison, was always the same. Yeah, I want revenge. I want that person to pay. I said, would you feel comfortable if the government killed this person instead of you? And that's wherein the real interesting conversation begins. Why do you feel more satisfied? Or is the trick that some people achieve, their moment of enlightenment, is when they realize that they wouldn't feel any more satisfied, that they basically outsourced murder to an entity that collected their tax money. So they paid someone to kill someone, you know? Whether it comes to law enforcement, I think that the whole point of me bringing this up is not a tangent. It's the point that this is the stuff that my music addresses, and these aren't the conversations that I think people that are way up there really want to have, because they don't just question a part of the structure. They question a larger point to it all, right? Like when we talk about workers' rights, I always say that there's a problem with people that just want a bigger slice of the pie because they're not asking themselves some fundamental questions, right? Yes, we want a bigger slice. Yes, the workers should get more, but we never asked ourselves, what's in the pie, right? How did this pie get formed? You know, we want a bigger slice of the pie as American workers. That's great. But if our bigger slice of the pie comes at the cost of other workers around the world, then we're not really about universal workers' rights. We're just about, you know, high, moderate, you know, center, left, neoliberal, whatever the fuck it's called now, you know, politics. And that's what we're dealing with, rather than asking the fundamental questions. So I would say that it's not just a question of people not getting to the top. I feel like the conversations that they create become problematic on a major scale. And that causes, I guess, a lot of news entities to be forced to spin it differently. You know, they have to be forced to not take you as seriously as they take the guy next to you in a fur coat who's wearing a dress rapping about shooting people. You know what I mean? They want people to take you less seriously than that person. They see that person as legitimate because they're signed to a major corporate entity, as opposed to you, who are speaking more intelligibly. And at the end, probably most media outlets are going to be like, oh, well, you speak so well, but, you know, they're getting the message from that little thing in their ear to keep it moving. And once you get out the studio, they don't invite you back, you know?
Well, you're certainly not going to get any complaints from our crowd for criticizing any president, whether right or left, and you'll find that out when you come down to Anarchapulco. So really looking forward to you coming down. It's just about a week away, a little over a week away. We're getting very close now. There's still tickets available. Check it out at anarchapulco.com. And it's coming up February 14th to 17th. Immortal Technique will be performing with Backwards and Elias Clay on February 14th on the evening of the first night of Anarchapulco. So check it out. And I know you're busy, Immortal. I'll let you go, and I'll see you down here in about a week.
Thank you very much for having me. Look forward to forwarding the conversation at Anarchapulco, Immortal Technique. I'm out.
And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
Man, you hear this bullshit they be talking every day, man. It's like these motherfuckers is just like professional liars, you know what I'm saying? It's wild. DJ Untouchable. Listen, Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga. Tell the truth, nigga.
They get away with telling lies that you dumb enough to vote for. Left, right, Republicans or Democrats. Red or blue, different sides on the same graph.
Cause we're living in a way that's so insane. Money taking up our day.
I was watching the towers, and though I wasn't the closest, I saw them crumble to the earth like they were full of explosives. And they thought nobody noticed the news report that they did about the bombs planted on the George Washington Bridge.